There was a spark, a loud pop, and then the most glorious shriek I'd ever heard echoing across my backyard fence. It sounded like someone had just lit a fire under a pair of overpriced Gucci sneakers, but it wasn't a fire. It was electricity, and the person screaming? Karen, my neighbor. The self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac, the same woman who thought she could steal power from an electrical engineer and get away with it. Spoiler alert, she couldn't. This isn't just a story about stolen electricity, it's about boundaries. It's about the quiet guy next door who finally said enough. It's about how one smart system and a whole lot of patience turned a passive neighborhood into a united front. And maybe, just maybe, it's about karma, the kind that comes with fuses, logs, and time-stamped footage. In the next 30 minutes, I'll take you deep into the twists and turns of what started as a simple power drain and ended with subpoenas, police reports, and the greatest HOA showdown this street had ever seen. If you've ever had that one neighbor, the one who pushes, prods, and pretends the rules don't apply to them, then you'll understand why I had to act, not out of anger, but out of principle. Because peace, as I've learned, isn't something you wait for. Sometimes you have to design it yourself. Let's rewind, shall we? There's a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't fireworks. It was sharper, cleaner, like a power line snapping midair. Then came the shriek, high-pitched, horrified, and unmistakably Karen. I was sipping my tea in the workshop, watching the voltage log on my monitor spike at exactly 2:17 a.m., when the backyard lit up in a flash of electric blue. I didn't need to guess what had happened. I'd spent the last 4 nights preparing for this exact moment, and I have to admit, it was kind of beautiful. Now, before you start picturing me as some unhinged mad scientist plotting revenge from a dimly lit garage, let me explain. I'm an electrical systems engineer. I build backup grids and fail-safe energy systems for data centers. Power isn't just something I use, it's something I speak. And when someone messes with the balance I've designed, it's not just theft, it's a personal insult. Which brings us to Karen, my neighbor, my headache, the woman who believed HOA fines didn't apply to her and that fences were more like decorative suggestions than property lines. A week earlier, I'd noticed something odd on my home grid monitor, a phantom draw of energy showing up between 1 and 3 a.m. every night, about 1.8 kilowatt hours, enough to run a small AC unit or, say, charge an electric ATV. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Maybe the hot tub's heater was cycling, maybe I left the garage light on, but when I killed every external circuit breaker except one, and still saw the draw, I knew something was wrong, and that's when I saw it. A single orange extension cord slinking over my fence like a thief in the night, disappearing behind my tool shed. Karen was stealing my electricity. Now look, if she had asked, I might have said yes, or at least explained how overloading solar balance can damage long-term battery performance, but she didn't ask. Instead, when I confronted her, mimosa in hand and sunglasses too big for her face, she laughed and said, "You've got solar, right? Chill, it's just a little juice. If you've ever worked with power, you know it doesn't work that way. Every amp matters, every surge, every imbalance. It all adds up." So I made a choice. Not out of anger, not to cause harm, but to teach a lesson that only someone who truly understands voltage could deliver. I installed a decoy outlet, legal, up to code, and completely safe to humans, but wired through a specialized impedance circuit calibrated to fry any device that tried to pull more than 3 AEMPMs. And her son's off-brand ATV charger, let's just say, it wasn't built for subtlety. That night, I watched as they fell for the trap. The cord slithered back over the charger, plugged in, and boom! Blue flash, loud pop, smoke. Karen screamed like she'd seen a ghost, or worse, a utility bill. Her son ran out in his boxers trying to wave away the smoke like it would undo what just happened. Me? I sat in my chair, sipped my tea, and smiled. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I finally knew they'd been caught. There's a lesson here, if you're looking for one. You don't get to borrow someone's resources without asking, and then call it harmless when you're caught. Respect, like electricity, flows both ways. And when you interrupt the current long enough, you might just find yourself in the dark. But that was just the beginning. Because when I tried to report Karen's theft to the HOA, they didn't just ignore me, they came after me instead. And that's when I realized I wasn't just dealing with one entitled neighbor. I was dealing with an entire system designed to protect her. Let's rewind the current a little further, to where the grid first started whispering something was wrong. It started with a whisper. Not the kind you hear with your ears, but the kind only a systems engineer would catch on a Tuesday night, sipping lukewarm tea, watching graphs most people would ignore. A dip. 1.8 kilowatt hours. Gone. No reason, no warning, just missing. At first I shrugged it off. Maybe the garage fridge compressor kicked on. Maybe my backup battery was rebalancing after a cloudy day. But then it happened again. And again. And again. Same time window. Between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock IEM. Like clockwork. Now let me be clear. Most homeowners would never notice this. That's the tricky thing about phantom power. It's not like your lights flicker or your breaker trips. It just slips away. A little draw here, a little drain there, invisible to the eye but loud as thunder to anyone who listens to their grid the way I do. I've spent years designing backup systems for hospitals, server farms, and government shelters. I know what 1.8 kilowatt hours means. It's not a phone charging. It's not someone running a fan. It's a vehicle. A serious draw from a serious machine. So I began to investigate, not with flashlights or confrontation, but with code. I pulled up the logs from my solar inverter and home energy monitor, time-stamped, color-coded, every fluctuation mapped against time of day and load strength. I even correlated it with temperature and humidity, just in case HVAC cycling was the culprit. Nothing matched. No internal system was responsible, which meant only one thing. Something external was leeching off my power. Now, here's where it gets weird. I live in a cul-de-sac of meticulously trimmed lawns and HOA-approved house colors. The kind of place where the most rebellious act is putting a gnome in your yard without board permission. I'm not the kind of guy who suspects my neighbors. But patterns don't lie. And right around the time this energy draw began, one of those neighbors, Karen, had been bragging about her son's new electric, loud, bulky, neon green, and plugged in every night like it was prepping for a desert rally. Still, suspicion isn't proof, so I did what any good engineer would do. I created a controlled environment. That night, I turned off every outdoor breaker except one. Just enough power to keep my system humming, but with a clear window into what shouldn't be active, and then I waited. Next morning, there it was, another drop, same size, same time. That's when I stepped outside and saw it. An orange extension cord. Not on my property the day before, now slinking over my fence. Plugged in, tucked neatly behind my shed. She was stealing from me. It's a strange moment, the first time you realize someone next door is quietly helping themselves to your resources like it's no big deal. There was no note, no knock on the door, just a quiet assumption that because I had solar panels I must not mind. But power doesn't work that way. It's not just what's generated, it's how it's balanced. A sudden 2 kW draw can mess with inverter calibration, overload charge controllers, even reduce the lifespan of battery storage. Karen didn't just borrow a little juice. She disrespected a system I spent years perfecting. And worse, she thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. Because sometimes justice starts not with rage, but with realization. A whisper on a graph. A dip in a log. A pattern that no one else sees. A little lesson? Pay attention to the quiet things. They often reveal the loudest truths. By then I knew what I had to do, but before I could confront her, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I showed up at her door, calm, curious, and that's when she laughed, patted my arm, told me I was such a tech guy and to relax. That laugh would echo in my mind for days. It didn't just dismiss the theft, it dismissed me. And that was the moment I stopped being the quiet neighbor. That was the moment I started designing the trap. And in the next part, I'll show you how I engineered a device so tempting, so perfect, that it couldn't be resisted, yet wouldn't hurt a soul. Every story needs a villain. Some wear black capes, some lurk in the shadows, and some wear oversized sunglasses, carry mimosas before noon, and quote the HOA handbook like it's the U.S. Constitution. Karen was the last kind. She moved into our quiet cul-de-sac 2 years ago, shortly after what we assumed was a messy divorce, based on the sudden influx of wine deliveries and the absence of any Mr. Karen. Her house was the largest on the block, freshly repainted in a shade of beige so aggressively HOA compliant it almost looked smug. From the beginning she stood out, not because of how loud she was, though she was loud, but because of how entitled she made everything feel. She talked like she owned the neighborhood, walked like it was a runway, and wielded the HOA rulebook like a weapon. I still remember the day she yelled at a 10-year-old for riding his bike too fast near her hydrangeas, or the time she called the board to complain about Tom's outdoor kitchen smelling too ethnic. Yeah, that kind of neighbor. But her favorite hobby? Making up new rules. She once printed out laminated flyers that said, "Only soft white bulbs allowed in porch lighting per HOA decorum standards." There is no such rule. She made it up, posted it anyway, and you better believe she enforced it with the passion of a self-appointed light bulb inspector. And yet, despite the complaints, the chaos, the fabricated citations, Karen somehow never got fined, never got warned, never even got a knock on the door from the HOA. Turns out, she was friends with Greg. Greg, the HOA board president. Greg, who thought being firm on policy meant letting Karen rewrite them. And so she ruled, the self-crowned queen of our community. But even queens have weaknesses. Karen's latest obsession was her son's brand new electric ATV. Bright green, turbo-loud, and wholly unnecessary for a suburban teenager whose greatest adventure was cutting acros. Nancy's lawn to save 10 seconds. She bragged about it at every gathering. This baby charges in 4 hours flat, fully electric, totally green. What she didn't mention was whose power she was using. Because that orange extension cord I found behind my shed, it didn't come from my house. It came from hers, wound up, looped perfectly, and slipped over the fence under cover of night. I imagine she thought she was being clever, that the cord would disappear before sunrise, that nobody would notice, but I did. Because I notice everything. And that's when it all clicked. The phantom draw, the spike in load, the cord that slithered across the boundary like it owned the space. Karen had decided my solar panels were her battery pack. Here's the irony. This was the same woman who once fined someone for leaving their garbage bin out an hour late. The same woman who said boundaries are what keep neighborhoods safe. And yet, when it came to my backyard, my power, my system, she crossed every line, not just physically, but ethically. A little lesson? Some people don't break rules because they think they're above them. They break them because no one ever stopped them before. I knew then that confronting her wasn't going to be enough. Karen didn't understand conversation, she understood control, so if I was going to make a point I'd have to speak her language. Not HOA bylaws, not passive-aggressive lawn notes, but action. And not just any action. Engineered justice. In the next chapter, I'll show you exactly how I designed the trap she couldn't resist, and couldn't blame anyone but herself for. I didn't want revenge. I wanted resolution, with voltage and elegance, because when someone steals from an engineer, they don't just take power, they challenge everything we've built and everything we know how to build back. So I sat down at my workbench, not with anger, but with precision, and I began to design the trap. Now let me be clear, this wasn't some cartoonish contraption with sparks flying and fuses popping like fireworks on the 4th of July. I'm not home alone. I'm a licensed systems engineer with a specialty in load balancing and emergency circuit routing, and what I built wasn't dangerous, at least not to people. What I needed was a deterrent, a consequence. Something that would break a charger, not a person. Something that screamed, "You crossed the line," without making me the villain in my own story. So I built a decoy outlet. It looked real, because it was real, mounted on the side of my tool shed, angled just right to seem forgotten, unattended, and irresistibly convenient. The kind of outlet someone like Karen or her midnight roaming son would think they'd found. But what they really found was a trap. Behind the faceplate, I wired the outlet through a custom impedance trip circuit. To anyone unfamiliar, it looked like a standard 120V source, but it was programmed, tuned like a concert piano, to allow exactly 3 IMs of current, just enough to power a string of patio lights. But try to pull anything bigger, like say a 6-amp ATV charger? Boom, the circuit would snap shut, not violently, but decisively. A carefully calculated voltage spike, routed through a secondary loop, would fry any device foolish enough to draw above the safe limit. The outlet would survive, the shed would survive, but the charger? Not so lucky. Of course, I tested it, thoroughly. I rigged it to an old leaf blower I'd been meaning to throw away. First at 2.5 AMs, that's fine. Then 3.5 amps. Click. Pop. A gentle curl of smoke, just like I planned. And that's when I smiled, because what I had wasn't just a trap, it was legal, it was safe, and more than anything, it was fitting. A thief takes something without permission. An engineer gives them something back. With consequences. A little lesson? Justice doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it just needs to hum quietly at 60 hertz until you cross the line. I installed the decoy outlet late one evening, just as the sun dipped below the rooftops. No spotlight, no signs, no warning, just temptation. I even left an orange extension cord, just like hers, coiled beside it, as if I'd forgotten it after yard work. A subtle nudge, a visual breadcrumb. Then I waited, not like a hunter, but like a technician watching a load test play out. 3 nights passed, nothing, and then, on the 4th night, the cord was gone, plugged in, wrapped tight, connected. My phone pinged. Voltage draw detected. 2.7 kilowatt hours, rising, threshold exceeded, trap activated. From my workshop, I watched the monitor light up, then came the pop, the spark, and, in the distance, that familiar, glorious shriek. Karen's son stumbled out barefoot in pajama pants, staring at the now smoking ATV charger like it had just betrayed him, which, in a way, it had, because it thought it was feeding from a careless outlet, but it was feeding from me. But the real fireworks hadn't even started yet, because 3 days later I received a letter, not from Karen, but from the HOA, a warning, an accusation, claiming I'd installed a hazardous electrical device along a shared boundary line. That's when I knew. Karen hadn't learned her lesson. She had doubled down. And now the HOA was backing her. So if they wanted war, I'd give them one. Engineered, documented, and time-stamped to perfection. 3 days after the charger fried and the backyard screamed, I found a letter in my mailbox. Elegant envelope, gold seal, font that tried a little too hard to say, "We're important." It was from the HOA. And it wasn't a thank you. The letter began with all the usual formality. Dear resident, community safety concern, violation of Section 12A. Apparently someone wondered who had filed a complaint stating that I'd installed a hazardous electrical device along a shared boundary. The irony? The device in question was located 3 full feet inside my property line, legally installed, wired to code, and safer than half the decorative lighting rigs Karen used during her infamous backyard brunches. But that didn't matter, because when the HOA gets involved, it's rarely about what's right. It's about who talks loudest, and Karen had a megaphone made of Chardonnay, gossip, and Greg. The HOA board president. A few hours later, a man in khakis and a smug smile knocked on my door. Clipboard in hand, name tag tilted sideways, the kind of guy who thought being on a committee made him king. "You can't just go installing unapproved devices near communal fencing," he said. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask for my side, just launched into bylaws, half of which sounded like Karen rewrote them the night before. I stayed calm, I always do. I explained that the outlet was on my land, that it was up to city code, that it posed no threat to anyone unless, say, someone plugged into it without permission. He scribbled something, avoided eye contact, and muttered about further review. Then he left. No thanks, no handshake, just judgment disguised as regulation. A little lesson? Sometimes rules don't protect people. They protect the people who know how to twist them best. The HOA, in theory, is supposed to make a neighborhood better, but in practice, it's often a battleground for power, egos, and petty vendettas. And Karen? Well, She didn't just play the game, she designed it. She'd been rewriting the narrative behind closed doors, telling neighbors I'd set up a booby trap, that her son was nearly electrocuted, that I was installing experimental devices to intimidate her family. Not only was it false, it was insulting, because I hadn't just built a legal circuit. I'd built a line, a very clear one, and she had crossed it again and again. But I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to rant on Facebook or start a lawn sign war. I was going to do what I do best: document, design, defend. I started printing logs, time-stamped energy draws, photos of the extension cord, screenshots of voltage spikes, diagrams of the circuit itself, annotated, labeled, idiot-proof. I organized everything into a manila folder and walked it straight into the HOA office. The woman at the front desk, Janice I think, flipped through it, her eyes widening with each page. "You're saying she plugged into your outlet? Twice," I said. "And I've got video." She pursed her lips, clearly torn between HOA loyalty and the weight of evidence. "We'll need to conduct a review," she said. "In the meantime, I suggest removing all outdoor outlets to avoid escalation." I leaned in just slightly. "Janice," I said, "this is an HOA that fines people for mailbox colors, but lets Karen run an illegal power hookup across property lines. I don't need permission to protect my home, but if this board keeps protecting her, I'll take all this to the city utility board and file a formal complaint for theft." She didn't reply, just nodded slowly. That evening, Karen came storming across the yard. No sunglasses, no brunch smile, just rage. She demanded to know what I'd done to the charger, said her son was traumatized, threatened to sue. I said maybe he should stop stealing electricity. Then I handed her a USB stick. "What's this?" she snapped. "Everything you need to realize." "You picked the wrong neighbor," and I closed the door. But I knew this wasn't over. Because when people like Karen lose control, they don't retreat, they reload. And when she did, I was ready, with cameras, logs, and the kind of circuit that makes denial impossible. There's something magical about hard data. It doesn't stutter, it doesn't take sides, and it doesn't care who's friends with the HOA president. It just tells the truth, clean, cold, and time-stamped. So when Karen decided to paint me as the neighborhood villain, I didn't argue. I built a server. I started with the outlet. The original decoy circuit had done its job beautifully. But I wanted more than a fried charger. I wanted evidence, inarguable, inescapable, undeniable. So I upgraded. I installed a data logger, carefully tucked into the base of a garden gnome. From the outside it looked like yard decor, but inside it was wired to monitor voltage draw, current load, and activation time. Every time something was plugged into the outlet, the gnome woke up. It would log the exact second the circuit activated, how much power was pulled and for how long. That data streamed directly to my home server and then backed up to the cloud. Next, I installed motion-activated cameras, camouflaged as birdhouses. One aimed at the outlet, another aimed at the common fence line. A third, discreetly tucked behind a rose trellis, had a full view of Karen's yard. Every movement, every cord, every late-night sneak, captured, logged, saved. Now I had a network, a grid of quiet observers, not watching in anger, but in preparation. And I wasn't done. I laid out a bright orange extension cord, my own this time, draped lazily over the fence, exactly like hers had been. But this one? It wasn't connected to anything. It was bait. Inside the mulch beneath the flower bed, I hid a secondary trigger system, non-lethal but designed to induce a quick spike the moment a draw exceeded 3 AEMs. It wouldn't hurt a person, but it would definitely ruin another charger. 3 nights passed, no activity. Then, at 1:42 a.m. on the 4th night, my phone pinged. Motion detected. Voltage draw initiated, current rising 2.7 kilowatt hours, search threshold exceeded. I opened the live feed. There he was, Karen's son, shirtless, sleepy, plugging the cord into the fake outlet like he'd done it 100 times, and then, pop. A spark, a soft hiss, and a very confused teenager stumbling backward as smoke rose once again. It wasn't as dramatic as the first time, but it was enough. Enough to prove a pattern, enough to seal a case. The next morning I organized everything: voltage graphs, time logs, camera footage synced to the second, footage of the cord moving over the fence, footage of Karen's son plugging it in, footage of the exact moment the circuit tripped, all cataloged, all clean, all legal, and I didn't just keep it for myself, I printed it, packaged it, duplicated it. One copy went to the HOA, another to the city utility office. Because at this point we weren't just talking about neighborly theft. This was unauthorized utility use, potential code violation, maybe even fraud. A little lesson? People can debate opinions, they can argue emotions, but they can't fight a log file with their name on it. That same day I received another knock on the door. But it wasn't Karen, it wasn't the HOA. It was Officer Daniels from the local precinct. Karen had reported me for endangering her family with electrical sabotage. I invited him in, and within 10 minutes of showing him the footage, the schematics, the timestamps, the logs, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Wow, you're not playing around." "No, officer," I said calmly, "but they are, and they're trying to drag the law into their tantrum." He closed his notepad. "Honestly," he said, "you're covered. This looks like theft of utilities. If she pushes it, you've got everything you need to protect yourself." He left, and across the street Karen stood watching, sunglasses back on, latte in hand, but this time she didn't smirk, she just stared. Because deep down, even she knew, you can spin a story, but you can't rewrite data. And when the neighbors saw that data for themselves, the whole block would finally understand they weren't alone. I thought I was alone. Turns out, I was just the first one to build a server about it. Because 3 days after Officer Daniels left my porch, neighbors started appearing, one by one, like ghosts stepping out of the fog. It began with Tom, the guy 2 houses down with the fancy outdoor kitchen and the world's most unnecessary built-in pizza oven. He waved me over one evening and said, "Hey, have you ever noticed your fridge lights blinking at night?" Then came Nancy, quiet, polite, always gardening. She leaned in and whispered like it was a confession. "My garden lights, they flicker around 2 a.m., then reset. Thought it was squirrels." And then came the Patels. They ran a small catering business out of their garage. Their chest freezer, packed with hundreds of dollars worth of prepared meals, had thawed twice in the last month. They thought it was a fault in their system until I showed them the footage. I invited them in, sat them down. One by one I played it. The cord slinking over the fence, the son plugging in the charger, the voltage logs, the second incident, the officer's reaction. Tom leaned back in his chair. "You're telling me she's been stealing power, not just from you?" I nodded. "And she's been using that power to run full backyard parties, karaoke, lights, fridges, probably her portable margarita machine." We all laughed. Then we all stopped laughing. Because it wasn't funny anymore, it was systemic theft. We started asking around, quietly, carefully. Turns out, Karen's orange extension cord had a history. People had seen it, felt it, sometimes draped over fences, sometimes coiled under porch railings. One guy even found it plugged into his RV outlet while he was away on vacation. She wasn't just a thief. She was a network, and her son, he was the delivery system, sneaking over under the pretense of retrieving a lost ball or checking on the dog, but always, always walking away with power. So we formed a group chat. What started as 3 families became 5, then 8, then 23. We called it Shock by Karen. By nightfall, we had a spreadsheet. Each household logged their strange electrical issues, photos of cords, power bill spikes, breaker trips, frozen security cam stills. I offered to help. Tom installed a smart energy monitor. Nancy let me set up a decoy cord and tripling camera. The Patels locked down their entire garage panel. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about restoring balance. A little lesson. The only thing more powerful than stolen electricity is shared outrage. And then came the HOA meeting. Normally a boring Tuesday night ritual where people argued about mailbox paint or hedgerow height, but not this time. We came in like it was court. USB sticks, screenshots, logs, footage. We took the floor, one by one. Karen sat in the front row, arms crossed, sunglasses on, indoors like she was at the Oscars. She tried to speak, tried to deflect. They're jealous, they're exaggerating, it's hearsay, but it wasn't. Because when Greg, the very HOA president who used to side with her, saw the evidence, even he couldn't defend her. And then came the bombshell. One neighbor had pulled a full year of power bills. The spike aligned perfectly with the week Karen's son got the ATV. Another matched his breaker logs, midnight flips, phantom resets. Everything lined up, and the room turned. The queen had fallen, and the crowd wanted justice. But this wasn't just about HOA politics anymore, because someone had been watching from beyond the fences, someone with real jurisdiction, and when the city utility board stepped in, the real reckoning began. Tuesday night, HOA Clubhouse. Normally, these meetings were as thrilling as watching paint dry on an HOA-approved fence. A dozen neighbors half listening while someone debated shrub height compliance. But not this time. This time, the room was full. Chairs were pulled from closets. People stood along the walls. Even old Mr. James, who hadn't been to a meeting since 2016, showed up with popcorn. Actual popcorn. Because tonight wasn't about bylaws, it was about accountability, and everyone knew exactly who it was about. Karen sat front and center, sunglasses on, posture stiff, fake calm, like she still believed she could control the room with a raised eyebrow and a well-timed complaint about someone's lawn edging. But the power had shifted, and the people were ready. The meeting began. Greg, the HOA president, and until recently one of Karen's staunchest supporters, cleared his throat and tried to keep things neutral. We've received reports regarding unauthorized power use across multiple properties, and we're here tonight to address concerns in an open and respectful manner. Respectful. That word tasted bitter after months of theft, manipulation, and silence. Then the neighbors stood, one by one. Tom spoke first, holding up screenshots from his smart meter. Every spike at 1:40 a.m. right after Karen's kid retrieved a ball from my yard. Nancy brought her gardening journal, yes, she had one, cross-referenced with the exact dates her lights flickered. The Patels rolled in a cooler full of thawed catering meat from the day their garage lost power. And I handed Greg a manila folder so thick it needed its own zip code. Inside, footage, data logs, circuit diagrams, a full timeline of incidents, police report, screenshots from the group chat, and yes, screen grabs of Karen's son plugging in cords. Karen didn't speak, not yet. She just shifted in her seat, slightly. But then came the final blow. Mr. Chang, a quiet neighbor who rarely left his house, stepped up with a full year of electric bills, color-coded, labeled, spiking exactly when Karen's son got his ATV. His voice didn't shake. Power's expensive, and some of us live on fixed incomes. We don't mind helping neighbors when they ask, but nobody asked us. And then, Karen snapped. She jumped up like a firecracker lit from below. This is a witch hunt. You're all just jealous. I pay dues too. I have the right to access community power. The room went silent, and then it exploded. Community power? Someone shouted. This isn't a public charging station. You've been stealing, Karen. You lied to the board. Greg looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. Even he couldn't save her now. The board voted right then and there. Suspension of all HOA privileges, revocation of committee roles, mandatory inspection of all external electrical lines, a formal report to the city's utility fraud division. Karen stormed out mid-vote, nearly knocking over the punch bowl and muttering something about lawsuits and being targeted. But no one followed her. Not this time. A little lesson: when truth shows up with receipts, even the loudest voice in the room has to go quiet. But the reckoning didn't stop at the clubhouse doors, because someone else had been listening, watching, waiting for this to escalate from petty HOA drama to municipal violation. The next morning, a certified letter arrived at Karen's doorstep, stamped from the City Energy Authority. Inside, a notice of investigation, a request for inspection, and a warning. Tampering with metered power is a criminal offense under City Code 4.37, and for once, Karen couldn't ignore it. Because her kingdom didn't just collapse. It got audited. At first, it felt like justice had been served. Karen walked out of the HOA clubhouse disgraced, her throne reduced to plastic patio chairs and empty accusations. But as it turns out, the real storm hadn't even started yet. Because the next morning a certified letter arrived at her doorstep, stamped in bold, City Energy Authority. Inside was a formal notice of investigation. She was now being looked into for unauthorized utility use, a KK, power theft. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was about municipal code violations, and those come with real teeth. The law is funny that way. People assume that if you're not breaking windows or stealing cars, you're not really a criminal. But utility theft? That's a different beast. Under City Code 4.37, any individual found tampering with metered electricity or drawing power without authorization can be subject to fines up to $5,000, 0 cents, criminal charges, restitution of stolen energy costs, and in extreme cases, jail time. Most people don't know that, but Karen was about to learn. The hard way. The city launched a full audit. I was contacted by an energy inspector named Cole. Polite, professional, and very curious. He asked for everything, and I gave it to him. The gnome-embedded data logger, the birdhouse cameras, the log files, the spreadsheet from our Shock by Karen group chat, the circuit diagrams. He went silent for a moment. Then he said, "You've built a better case than most of our investigators." Meanwhile, Karen didn't cooperate, ignored the inspection request, missed the follow-up call, claimed she was being harassed and stalked. But the thing about city code is, it doesn't care about feelings. A subpoena was issued, and now she was officially on the hook. Cole later confirmed that over 3,000 kilowatt-hours had been stolen across 9 properties over 4 months. That's more than enough to power a small apartment for an entire year. Not a misunderstanding, not a technical error, but a pattern. A deliberate, repeated misuse of private infrastructure. And the numbers didn't lie. $1,820, 0 cents in stolen electricity. $500, 0 cents in HOA fines. Pending civil claims from 3 neighbors, a potential misdemeanor theft charge, and 1 very, very embarrassed family. A little lesson: some people treat consequences like rumors until they show up in bold print on legal stationery. The final blow came when the city issued an enforcement notice. All unauthorized cords and wiring must be removed within 7 days. Failure to comply would result in forcible entry for inspection and additional charges. Neighbors watched as Karen's yard slowly changed. The karaoke machine, gone. The patio lights, disconnected. The ATV, rumored to be sold. Her son, now mowing lawns for free, eyes down, earbuds in. And Karen. No more mimosas, no more flyers taped to front doors, no more HOA whisper campaigns. She'd gone quiet, because the numbers had spoken. But here's the thing, this wasn't just about Karen anymore. Her downfall had done something else, something bigger. For the first time in years, our cul-de-sac had changed. People who barely nodded before now shared coffee. We talked, we laughed, we trusted each other again. All because someone tried to steal a few kilowatts and got caught in the light. But justice doesn't just mean punishment. Sometimes it means rebuilding what was broken and protecting it for good. And that's exactly what came next. Weeks passed. The buzz of the ATV faded. The patio speakers stopped thumping, and the backyard light shows Karen once proudly called her suburban Coachella went dark. It was like someone had pulled the plug on her world because, well, we had. Not out of spite, but because sometimes the only way to reset a system is to cut the current. The neighborhood changed too. People smiled more, waved more, stayed a little longer at the mailbox. Our group chat, once a digital war room, slowly evolved into something lighter. Garden tips, used tools for sale, even a meme or two about extension cords with criminal records. In a strange, poetic way, Karen had brought us together, not through kindness, but through shared resistance. And maybe that's how community is really built. Not just through block parties, but through adversity overcome as one. But Karen, she was different. Not gone, not exactly humbled, but definitely quieter. No more laminated flyers on door handles. No more HOA reminders printed in cursive font with passive-aggressive highlights. No more stomping across lawns like she was surveying her empire. She still lived there, still wore the sunglasses, still watered her flowers like she was auditioning for a gardening commercial, but something had dimmed. One afternoon, while I was calibrating my solar inverter, I heard her footsteps behind me. I turned slowly. There she was, hands clasped. No sunglasses this time, no mimosa, no bravado. Just Karen, the woman, not the character. I just wanted to say, she hesitated, well, I guess I owe you an apology. I blinked. For which part? I asked gently. The power theft, the fake HOA reports, or the police complaint? She winced. All of it, she muttered. I didn't realize how serious it was. I thought it was harmless, that word again. I didn't yell, didn't shame, just nodded. It's never harmless when you take something that doesn't belong to you. Especially not repeatedly. Especially not from people who trusted you to be a neighbor. She nodded, eyes lowered. Well, she said awkwardly, just wanted to say that. Then she turned and walked back to her house. Slower, quieter, smaller. A little lesson? Some people change. Some just stop fighting the truth long enough to see themselves in it. Did I forgive her? Not fully, but I didn't need to, because forgiveness isn't always about the other person. Sometimes it's just about taking back your peace, and I had that now. Peace didn't mean silence. It meant balance. A home where the power readings matched the sunlight, where no strange cords snaked across fences, where neighbors waved not because they had to, but because they wanted to. I never removed the decoy outlet. It still sits there, tucked beside the shed. Not as a trap, not anymore, but as a reminder that peace, like electricity, needs wiring, protection, and respect. And when someone tries to steal it, you don't need revenge. You just need a plan, a log file, and a community that refuses to be dimmed. Because in the end, the brightest justice isn't the spark that burns, it's the one that lights up everything around it. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If you've ever had a Karen in your life, share your story in the comments. And don't forget, subscribe. Because the next story is going to be even more of a firecracker.